I 28M have a younger sister, Maddie 24F, who I've always been close to. Maddie and I grew up in a tight-knit family. Our parents worked a lot, so I was always the one watching over her. I taught her how to ride a bike, helped her with homework, and when she had her first heartbreak, I was there with ice cream and bad movies. Maddie used to call me her hero, and honestly, it meant the world to me. So when Maddie had her kids, two adorable little ones, ages 5 and 3, I felt like it was my duty to help out. I mean, that's what big brothers do, right? You step up. Maddie had her first kid at 19. She was young, scared, and trying to figure it out. Her boyfriend at the time, now her ex, was in and out of the picture, mostly out. So I was there, taking care of the baby while she figured out how to balance work and her personal life. I never minded. I love my niece and nephew. They are full of energy and just the best. It's tiring sometimes, but they've always brought me so much joy. It almost became routine that I'd watch them several times a week, sometimes all day if she needed. No matter what, I was happy to help her because she was my little sister, and I wanted her to succeed. I wanted her to have a chance to work, maybe date again, and just breathe. But lately, something's changed. Maddie has been taking these digs at me, and it's been getting worse over time. At first, it was just a comment here or there that I could brush off. You know, things like must be nice to sleep in until 10, right, when I'd show up at her place to babysit. Or if only we could all be as relaxed as you, when I'd mention taking a day to myself. I know I wasn't exactly at the pinnacle of my career. I've had some struggles trying to find my way. I've bounced between a few different jobs, some of them pretty dead-end, I admit, but I'm working on it. I'm doing freelance graphic design now, and though it's not a stable 9-to-5, I'm actually making decent money and trying to build a portfolio. I always thought Maddie understood that. She knew I had a rough couple of years, especially during COVID when everything just felt like it was falling apart. I figured she'd be the last person to judge me. But instead, it feels like she's turned into my biggest critic. It's like she's projecting her own stress onto me or something, but instead of talking to me, she's decided that I'm an easy target. The thing that really broke me happened a few weeks ago. We were at a family dinner, just me, Maddie, the kids, and our parents. It had started as a good night. My niece and nephew were being their usual chaotic selves, running around, and I was helping get them settled at the table. Everything seemed fine, until my mom asked me if I had gotten any more freelance clients lately. I told her I was working on it and that it was a slow process, but things were starting to pick up. Maddie snorted, and I could feel her eyes on me. I tried to ignore it, but then she said it clear as day, in front of everyone, "Maybe that's why you don't have a real job." My mom looked shocked, and my dad just awkwardly cleared his throat. The kids, of course, were oblivious, too focused on their chicken nuggets to notice, but I felt like I'd been slapped. I tried to laugh it off, said something like, "Wow, okay, thanks for the support," but Maddie just rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, I'm just joking. You take everything so seriously." I didn't respond. I didn't want to make a scene in front of our parents or the kids. I just shut down for the rest of dinner. I barely said a word, and Maddie acted like everything was fine, like she hadn't just ripped me apart in front of everyone. The thing is, this wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but it was definitely the worst. I kept thinking about it all night and for the next few days. The words played on repeat in my head, and every time I thought about it, I just got angrier and angrier. The next time Maddie called me to babysit, I told her no. I said I was busy. She sounded annoyed but said she'd figure something out. A few days later, she called again, and again. I told her I couldn't. This time, she pushed back, asking why I was being so difficult. I took a deep breath and told her, "Look, Maddie, I love you and I love the kids, but I'm not going to keep doing favors for someone who thinks I'm a loser. I'm not going to help you if you can't show me some basic respect." She went silent for a moment, and then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Are you serious?" she said. "You're really that upset about a joke? You need to grow up." I could feel my face getting hot. I told her it wasn't a joke to me. That I've always been there for her, no questions asked, and the least she could do was not treat me like garbage in front of our parents and her kids. She got defensive, said I was overreacting, and that she didn't mean it like that. I told her that until she could apologize and actually mean it, I was done babysitting. She hung up on me. Since then, it's been a mess. My mom called me the next day, saying that Maddie was really upset and that she was struggling because now she didn't have anyone to watch the kids while she worked. I told my mom everything about the comments, about how Maddie had been treating me, and how I just couldn't keep putting myself in that position. My mom understood, but she also said Maddie was under a lot of stress and that I should try to forgive her. I told her I'd forgive Maddie when Maddie actually apologized. A few days after that, Maddie texted me. She didn't apologize, but she said she needed me to watch the kids on Friday because she had a shift and no one else could do it. I told her no again. She started sending me long messages about how I was punishing her kids for something that wasn't their fault, how they missed me, and how I was being selfish. That one hurt. I love those kids, and the thought of them thinking I didn't want to see them made me feel like the worst uncle in the world. But I also knew I couldn't keep letting Maddie walk all over me. My dad got involved after that. He doesn't usually step into our fights, but he called me and asked if we could talk. He said Maddie was really struggling, that she'd made some bad decisions with her finances, and that she was barely scraping by. He said she'd been lashing out because she was stressed and scared, not because she actually thought I was a loser. I told him I got it, but that it wasn't an excuse. I said I'd always help Maddie because I loved her, but I wasn't going to let her treat me like crap anymore. He said he understood, but I could tell he was disappointed. A few days after the conversation with my dad, I was feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was still anger simmering beneath the surface, anger at Maddie for taking me for granted and for throwing hurtful words my way without a second thought. But there was also guilt and a tinge of sadness. I couldn't help but feel that somehow, this whole situation was my fault. I was supposed to be the big brother who always had it together, who always stepped up when things got tough, and yet here I was, refusing to help the one person I'd always promised to protect. I knew Maddie was struggling, but I also felt that my own struggles had been brushed aside. Her words had hurt me, and I couldn't just pretend like they didn't. I was still mulling over all of this when Maddie called. I saw her name pop up on my phone and hesitated for a moment. I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something in me told me to pick up. Maybe it was hope that she was calling to apologize, that she'd finally realized how much her words had stung and was ready to make things right, so I answered. The conversation started off awkward. Maddie didn't exactly seem remorseful. Her voice was tight, and I could tell she was holding back some of the frustration she was clearly feeling. She asked me, in a tone that was more of a demand than a request, if I could watch the kids on Friday. She said she had something important to take care of, and she really needed me to step up. I listened to her, feeling my stomach twist in knots. I wanted to help her. I wanted to be there for my niece and nephew like I'd always been. But the resentment was still there, lingering like a shadow over everything else. I took a deep breath and told her no. I said it firmly, but I tried to keep my tone calm, hoping that maybe she'd understand. I wasn't expecting the reaction that followed. Maddie didn't take my refusal well. She immediately launched into how difficult things were for her, how she was barely making ends meet, how she was stressed beyond belief, and how I didn't understand what it was like to be in her shoes. She said I didn't know how hard it was to have kids and that I was making her life even more difficult by refusing to help. The way she said it stung, as if she was implying that my struggles were somehow less valid because I didn't have children. I was stunned. I knew Maddie was under pressure, but I didn't think she'd go this far. She was trying to guilt me into babysitting, trying to make me feel like I was a failure as a brother for not stepping in. But the way she was saying it, like it was my duty to help her, like I owed it to her because I was her brother, made me realize something. I realized that Maddie didn't see what I was doing as a favor. She saw it as an obligation, something that I had to do because we were family. She saw my willingness to help as a given, and that hurt more than anything else. Maddie didn't stop there. She kept pushing, her words getting sharper and more biting. She said that I had no real responsibilities, that all I did was sit around, relax, and take things easy. She said I was being selfish, and that it wasn't like I had a busy life to begin with. The way she said it, with that dismissive tone, made my blood boil. She was completely disregarding everything I'd been through, all the uncertainty, all the stress of trying to figure out my career, all the work I'd been putting in to build something for myself. It was like she saw me as a lazy, good-for-nothing brother who was just coasting through life without a care. In that moment, I felt something break inside me. I felt the last thread of patience snap. I realized that I couldn't keep doing this, that if I gave in, I would be setting a precedent that Maddie could say whatever she wanted, treat me however she wanted, and I would still be there, no questions asked. I knew I couldn't do that to myself. I couldn't keep putting myself in a position where I was being belittled, where I was being treated as if my worth was measured by how much I could do for her. I told Maddie no again, this time more firmly. I told her that I wasn't going to babysit, that she needed to figure it out on her own. I could hear the disbelief in her voice as she tried to argue, but I stood my ground. I could feel my heart pounding, and every word she said just made me more resolute. She was angry, frustrated, and I knew she didn't understand why I was refusing. But I also knew that I couldn't let her keep treating me this way. Maddie hung up on me, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, guilt, and, oddly enough, a sense of relief. That Friday started off like any other day. I was still thinking about the argument with Maddie, but I was determined to focus on my own life for once. I was trying to establish a routine, trying to be productive, and working on some freelance projects that I hoped would eventually turn into something more consistent. It wasn't easy. Staying motivated was a struggle when there was so much uncertainty in my life, but I was making progress. I was finally starting to feel like I was on the right track, even if it was just a small step in the grand scheme of things. Around noon, I was deep into my work, making some headway on a project that I had been struggling with for a while. The sudden sound of my doorbell pulled me out of my zone. My heart sank a little because, even before I got up, I had a feeling I knew who it was. There was this sense of dread that washed over me, and as soon as I opened the door, my suspicions were confirmed. There was Maddie, standing there with her kids, both of them holding onto her hands. She looked tired, and there was a determined, almost defiant look on her face that I immediately recognized. Without much preamble, Maddie walked right past me, bringing the kids inside. It all happened so fast that I barely had time to process it. My niece and nephew, innocent as ever, smiled at me as they came in, oblivious to the tension between their mom and me. They looked happy to be there, excited even, and that only made everything harder. I felt a rush of emotions: anger at Maddie, confusion, sadness, and a deep sense of powerlessness. I tried to explain to Maddie that I couldn't do this today. I was busy. I had work to do, responsibilities, things that I needed to focus on. I was trying to be calm, trying not to let my frustration show in front of the kids, but Maddie wasn't having any of it. She didn't want to hear what I had to say. She was set on leaving them with me, and nothing I could say was going to change her mind. She brushed off everything I said like it was just an excuse, like I was being difficult on purpose. There was this hardness in her eyes, and she looked at me like I was failing her, like I was letting her down in the worst possible way. She told me she was done with my excuses, that she had somewhere important to be, and she needed me to take care of the kids. She said it was my obligation as their uncle, that family was supposed to help each other, and I was being selfish by refusing. There was a finality to her tone, as if she'd already made up her mind, and nothing I said mattered. Before I could even react, she gave me a forced smile, told the kids she'd be back later, and then she turned and walked out the door. I stood there, stunned, as I watched her leave. She didn't look back. She just got in her car and drove away, leaving me with my niece and nephew. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I mean, I knew Maddie was upset. I knew she wasn't happy with me, but I never thought she'd go this far. It was like she was testing me, pushing me to see if I'd cave, if I'd just accept it and do what she wanted because I didn't have a choice. I looked down at the kids, both of them smiling up at me, and I felt my heart break a little. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know about the arguments, the hurtful words, the tension between their mom and me. They were just happy to see their uncle, happy to spend the day with me. I forced a smile, trying not to let my emotions show. It wasn't their fault. None of this was their fault, and I didn't want them to feel like they were a burden, but inside, I was reeling. I felt trapped, frustrated, and completely disrespected. The rest of the day was a blur. I tried my best to entertain the kids, to keep them happy and occupied, but it was hard. I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to Maddie, to the way she'd looked at me, to the way she'd just left without a second thought. I kept thinking about all the times I'd been there for her, all the times I'd dropped everything to help her, and how little that seemed to mean to her now. I felt used, like my kindness had been taken for granted, like I was nothing more than a convenience to her. Later that evening, I finally managed to get the kids to settle down. It was almost bedtime, and they were getting sleepy, yawning as we watched one last episode of their favorite cartoon. The day had been exhausting, but I'd done my best to put on a brave face for them. They were good kids, innocent, playful, and completely unaware of the turmoil between their mom and me. They just wanted to have fun and spend time with their uncle, and I did everything I could to make it a good day for them. But I was emotionally drained, and I kept glancing at my phone, waiting for Maddie to call and say she was coming to pick them up. When my phone finally buzzed, I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that Maddie would say she was on her way. I answered, expecting to hear her tell me she'd be there soon, but instead, what I got was a shock. Maddie didn't ask if she could come pick up the kids. She told me to bring them to her. It was like a punch to the gut. I'd spent the entire day looking after her children, without any real notice, without any regard for what I had going on, and now she wanted me to pack them up and drive them back to her place. I was stunned, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. It felt like a new low, even for Maddie. She hadn't asked if I was okay with it, hadn't considered that I might be exhausted, that I'd been dealing with her kids all day while trying to keep my own emotions in check. She'd made a demand, as if I owed her this, as if my entire purpose was to be at her beck and call. There wasn't a trace of appreciation in her voice, no gratitude for the fact that I'd stepped up when she needed me, despite the way she'd been treating me. It was just another expectation, another way for her to take advantage of me, and it stung. I felt my stomach twist with a mix of anger and disbelief. But she wasn't interested in my feelings. She didn't care that I was tired or that I felt like she was crossing a line. She just repeated herself, insisting that it was my responsibility to bring the kids back. She spoke with this entitled tone, like it was a given that I'd do as she said. I could barely find the words to respond. I felt like my head was spinning. How could she be so dismissive, so oblivious to how her actions affected me? It was as if she genuinely believed that I didn't have a life of my own, that my time didn't matter as much as hers. Eventually, I gave in, though it made me feel sick to my stomach. Not because I thought she was right, but because I knew the kids needed to get home, and I didn't want them to be caught up in the middle of this mess. I wasn't going to argue with her while they were sitting there, watching me with those innocent eyes. They didn't deserve that. They'd had a good day, and I wasn't going to ruin it for them. So, I packed up their things, got them into my car, and started the drive to Maddie's place. Every mile felt heavy, like a reminder of just how little she respected me. When I got to Maddie's house, she was waiting outside, her arms crossed and that same defiant look on her face. There wasn't even a hint of appreciation in her eyes, no acknowledgement of what I'd done for her that day. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say she was sorry for the inconvenience. She just took the kids, barely even looking at me, and told me she'd be bringing them over again tomorrow. It was like she hadn't heard a word I'd said, like everything that had happened over the past few days meant nothing to her. She just assumed I'd do it all over again, no questions asked. I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. The nerve, the entitlement, it was overwhelming. She acted like I was nothing more than a babysitter, someone who was obligated to drop everything whenever she needed help. It was infuriating, and I could feel my blood boiling as I listened to her. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I told her no. I told her I wasn't going to babysit again until she could show me some respect, until she could acknowledge that I had a life of my own, that my time was valuable, that I wasn't just there to be used whenever it suited her. Maddie looked taken aback, like she hadn't expected me to push back. She tried to argue, saying it was my duty as her brother, that family was supposed to help each other. She said that if I was offended by a joke, then fine, she was sorry. But the way she said it, it was clear she didn't mean it. It wasn't an apology, it was just words, something she said to try and get me to back down. There was no sincerity, no real understanding of why I was upset, of why her words and her actions had hurt me so much. It was like she thought I was overreacting, like my feelings didn't matter. I felt a wave of frustration, and I know I wasn't going to get through to her. She wasn't ready to see things from my perspective, to understand how her actions had affected me. She was still caught up in her own world, her own struggles, and she couldn't see past that. So, I just nodded, turned around, and walked back to my car. I could feel her eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I was done trying to explain myself, done trying to make her see why I was hurt. I knew that nothing I said in that moment was going to change anything. I got home that night feeling drained but also oddly at peace. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself, like I was taking control of my own life. It wasn't easy, and I knew it was going to be a struggle, but it was a step in the right direction. I loved my family, but I couldn't keep letting them take advantage of me. I needed to set boundaries, to make it clear that my time, my feelings, my life mattered too. And if Maddie couldn't see that, if she couldn't respect that, then maybe it was time for me to take a step back. To focus on myself, on what I needed, and to let her figure out her own life without relying on me as her safety net. Am I Rita for refusing to babysit my sister's kids after she called me a loser?